Good morning, Rachel. Welcome everybody to the Where Does It Come From podcast. And today I'm really honoured to have Rachel Smith-Lyte on the podcast, who is an activist. She's involved in the Green Party. She stood as MP, and she's also currently a Green Party candidate. So welcome aboard, Rachel.
Thank you. Can I just be really pedantic and correct you? I'm actually a councillor.
What did I say?
Candidate.
Oh,
So
that was my brain. Yeah, no, don't worry about that.
No, don't worry. It's actually, I'm both. I'm always, the candidate thing is ongoing, but I'm currently sitting on East Suffolk Council.
And I know that, so I don't know why I said candidate. That was really that was me trying to read something at the same time and multitask and those kind of things. I think I might be editing that little bit. So anyway, so I'll just say again. Welcome very much to the Where Does It Come From podcast to Rachel Smith-Lyte, who is a Green activist. She's also a Green Party candidate who stood for MP many times, and she's currently serving as a Green Party councillor. So welcome, Rachel, to the Where Does It Come From podcast. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, your roles, and what brought you into politics and activism in the first place?
Okay, I was born and brought up in East Suffolk, and I cut a long, boring story short, done the usual kind of, I did my degree actually as a mature student in politics and history. I did that in Bristol, and I sort of did worked. I didn't travel as like a kind of aimless travel. I worked as teaching English in Indonesia for about a year. That was a long time ago. It was 20 years ago now. And lived in London for a couple of years, so kind of moved around, seen what's out there, and come back. And one of my motivations, sort of the kind of the homing thing, was because I wanted to try in my own small way to change things to green things. And I was involved with Bristol Green Party briefly, but it kind of wasn't quite right. And I also I was very much a small fish in a big pond. Not that I'm a particularly big fish now, but I just, you know what I mean? I just thought I may be able to have more impact on my home turf. So I would say, I've been thinking about this, okay, I had a sort of what you might call a road to Damascus moment when I was actually working in Indonesia at the turn of the last century, obviously not the one before that. And as you don't choose these things, they just come to you. And it came to me very strongly while I was over there, not necessarily even based on what I was experiencing or seeing out there, but I realized I had to up the game. I had to do more. I had been previously involved with Greenpeace as an activist for them, but I realised I had to kind of go, when I came home to the UK, I realised I had to do more. And so it kind of has gone from there. I used to do a lot of wildlife conservation. I worked as a field teacher at RSPB Minsmere Reserve. And I've given hours as a conservation volunteer to, managing habitats in various places in Suffolk for wildlife. But I realised that was like putting a plaster on a broken leg, with the looming climate crisis coming down the road. And that was when I got involved with the Green Party, and that was in 2011. I joined. And then I quite quickly, I was helping other people with their campaigns, but I quite quickly actually, I was lucky. I got mentored, if you like, informally by somebody who'd been in the party a long time and was very good and seemed to recognise something in me, a kind of lunacy possibly, or some sort of keenness anyway. And so I sort of started standing as what they call paper candidate. So I didn't do any actual campaigning. I was a name on a ballot paper. That was it. And then I kind of, when I didn't win, I thought, darn it. And then I thought, I want to do this for real. I'm serious about this. And I got my first seat in May 2019, on East Suffolk Council, which of course was Suffolk Coastal District Council and Waveney Council District Council, which merged to form this new council 2 years ago. So I've been doing that now since then. I'm also an Extinction Rebellion activist, as you will have seen from my Twitter feed, and I did my first Insulate Britain type, well, I say type because it wasn't just IB, it was an amalgamation of XR and IB on Saturday. Afternoon and evening. Yeah, I sat on a road in Vauxhall in London.
Right, wonderful. Yeah, that's really, I didn't know that, so that's really, really interesting. We'll come back to that one in a bit.
Yeah, sure.
No, I knew you were heavily involved in Extinction Rebellion, but I wasn't sure whether you'd how far that had gone as yet. So that's really interesting. No, I mean, obviously, for people who don't know, Rachel and I actually worked together probably, I don't know, 25 years ago, maybe
1995 to 1997. I was at BT.
Goodness, yeah, we were at BT, so that's how we got to know each other, as slightly more sociable creatures probably than we are now. But it was a long time ago, so it's been really interesting to follow your career, and obviously we've both taken slightly different directions with the same underlying drivers, I think, which is quite interesting. But yeah, no, so it's been wonderful to follow your career and see what's happening, and that you actually became a councillor year before last now, so that's fantastic. But one thing I particularly wanted to ask you about, because it's very current now, is COP26, because I've seen from your feeds that obviously you were there and you were busy being very active in demonstrations and things when you were up there. So can you tell us your story of COP26, because I think people will be really interested to hear it.
Okay, my story with COP26 came about, well, it's hard to pinpoint. But when I became, I've been aware of it for a long time, well over a year, and I kind of knew I had to be there somehow. I had to be there. I had to make it happen. And because I did something called the Rebel Trail last year, which was walking from Birmingham to London. Yeah, I had to just check in my head I got that the right way around. That was the right direction of travel. Last year I did that, walking the HS2 phase 1 line, with some other rebels, as it were, to basically two things. One was to sort of survey the damage that HS2 project is doing to wildlife and Britain's remaining 2.4% of ancient woodland. And the second reason for that really was to obviously highlight and document what was going on along the way. And I feel quite emotional talking about it now, because I had no clue. If you don't live on the line, you probably won't have, frankly, and our media are not exactly telling people the truth. So anyway, through that, I met a lovely person called Helen, who's brilliant. She's an expedition leader for a living. And because of getting to know her and obviously others as well, another one of who joined us in Glasgow, I sort of vaguely became aware that there was this crazy, mad plan to walk from London to Glasgow and in time for COP, called Camino to COP. And so the 5th of September, about 30 or 40 people slash nutters started this crazy idea, this walk from London on the 5th of September. I would love to have been able to take that. Well, I don't know if I would love to have done, actually, because I'm much more of a cyclist than I am a walker. And I don't know if it was really hard, the bit that I did do, so I don't know if I'd survived it. But anyway, part of me would have loved to have done the whole thing, but I couldn't, because I just don't have the time. So I joined them in Carlisle, and that was on the 13th, 14th of October, I think. And then it took us about 2 weeks to walk from Carlisle, arriving in Glasgow on the 30th on that lovely sunny Saturday, despite all the rain. We were so relieved that we arrived in the dry. So otherwise it would have, apart from anything, the photos wouldn't have looked very good. So to a quite quiet reception, but lots of journalist interest, which is fantastic. So and then so that you would think that would be the end of it, but it kind of wasn't, because we had with us a wonderful garment which you might be interested in, Jo, called the Coat of Hopes. Which started life on the South Coast in Newhaven in August, and it was a blank piece of wool blanket made into a coat, a very basic long floor-length coat, it was completely bare. By the time we got to Glasgow, it was covered in patches, beautiful, sometimes really quite intricate embroidered patches that people all over the UK had made and sent to us, and we've been frantically stitching en route to get these patches on in time for arrival in Glasgow. It even had a train in the end. It had an extension, and it weighed a ton.
But that's one of those things, isn't it, that clothing and things like that can tell stories, and they can be used in so many different ways, and you emotionally put so much into it. And I think I saw a photo of the wonderful Caroline Lucas. Did she wear it or just hold it up?
She wore it. We were, I was like, because what was happening once we arrived in Glasgow is every morning at 9 a.m, 9:30 thereabouts, a group of us would take it from its resting place in a church called the Tron, St George's Church in Glasgow, where it's that's where it kind of was living. It was almost like it was in a museum. It's not a museum, it's a working church, and it's also a Catholic, but it was sort of displayed beautifully on this stage sort of area. So it was lit, it was fantastic. And it would come off that resting place every morning. We would walk it down. Barbara, who wore it, who was really the orchestrator of the whole of the coat, she's like 6 foot, I don't even know, 6'2", 3. She's super tall, so it's perfect because she could literally carry the whole thing. She could wear it with her
waddle
it, work it. So we would walk it down to the Blue Zone of Cop every morning. I didn't do every morning because I started off staying in Glasgow city centre-ish, and then unfortunately I had to move out, which was always the plan. Nothing went wrong. It was just that I only had accommodation in Glasgow itself for the first 4 nights, and after that I was moving out. I had to move out of town by about sort of 15 miles, so I couldn't then do that every morning, be with them. But I was absolutely determined I was going to be there for Caroline Lucas, and we met her at the Blues, just outside the Blue Zone. And bless her, she's such a good sport. She must have had such a packed schedule, but she made time to wear it. We sang the song, the coat, there's a song that goes with it, of course, and she sang along, and she was visibly moved. And she's just, I'm such a girl fan, so I'm biased. I'm so biased anyway, I don't pretend that to have any impartiality where she's concerned. But she was such a superstar, so yeah, that was lovely. We also bumped into John Kerry another time.
Wonderful.
He was really beautiful manners, but we feel like we nearly got him to wear it, but he was just in a rush, and fair enough, because it's not just a case of you just bung it on and we take some snaps. You have to have the song, and it's ceremonial, and the whole thing takes time.
No, that's wonderful.
So that was the Coat of Hopes. I think I'm not quite sure. I'm meeting some of those wonderful people I got to know during that Camino next weekend in London, and I'm hoping to hear more about what's happened to the coat then. But I'm pretty certain it won't get stuffed away in a case in a loft somewhere. It's too important.
Yeah, again, it's the stories. It's probably the coat, and then the stories. It almost needs to have stories written around it and photographs and all of that kind of thing. What it means as opposed to what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was number one. The number two strand, I was there. I'm on a National Green Party Campaigns Committee, Climate Committee. There's 4 of us, soon to be 5. And we've spent months, as you might expect, preparing for COP26. It's been incredibly complicated and long-winded, but we finally got there, and I was in Glasgow for that as well, putting the finishing touches, making placards, getting our posters up, making some into banners, and we had our 10-point climate plan leaflet as well that we were distributing. So I was kind of there in that with that hat on, and then I was also there with my XR hat on as well. I think I took part the first week. There was just every day there was some kind of march, and I think I pretty much did them all, including a demonstration outside JP Morgan. So yeah, it was pretty full on. The Fridays for Future, oddly enough, the Friday was, I think, the biggest one of those I've ever seen. It was amazing. Of all the youngsters, so great to see them. And then on the Saturday, the People's March, it was 100,000 people on the streets. I mean, it was, we just, I don't know, I hadn't really analysed it, but I was thinking in the thousands, but not 100,000. And we think we were all blown away. And it was raining and blowing a gale. So we were just bowled over by how many people were there.
Fabulous.
It was phenomenal. Yeah.
I interviewed somebody last time, actually a couple of weeks ago, who was there at the time. I did a live one from there, and he was telling me that the marches and things that he was actually there as a delegate, but he took a part in a couple of marches as well. But he was saying that the atmosphere inside was really muted, but the atmosphere outside was really lively, you know, samba bands, lots of excitement going on, lots of community feel going on, whereas inside it felt a lot more restrained, I suppose.
I can well believe it. I mean, obviously I'm not important enough to be allowed into the blue zone, but from what I saw from the stream, you know, from the filming of the inside, it was very muted. I mean, obviously it's a really deadly serious business, if you'll pardon the pun, you know, and it shouldn't be like a carnival. You know, they were there to work hard to do the diplomacy necessary to get the crucial deals done, you know, which we now know didn't happen. But so it should have been somber to an extent, but I was very glad to be where I was with who I was, and to be inspired. You know, we met delegates from all over the world, you know, in the street, and had some really interesting conversations, some impromptu dancing. As you say, the samba bands were very much in evidence. And one particular day, actually, I went to Pollock Shields, which is a fantastic community in the south of Glasgow. They are an example to us all of how to build community and care for one another in this amazing outdoor former bowling green space, with sort of portaloo, and you can always get a cup of tea. It's that kind of place. It's so welcoming, and the kids all race across there after school, and it's wonderful. And Amal, if you must have heard of little Amal, the refugee puppet who's come from Syria. Well, she arrived, and that was it. I was just in pieces. I was just blubbing. It was so emotional when she turned up, and all the kids were just like, you know, we were all like, oh. So it was I'll never forget it.
Life-changing experience.
But
when you went, I mean, obviously you've been planning it for some time. What were your hopes? What were your goals when you went there?
Right. My goals were my own to an extent, but they were also, and I'm not just saying this is a mouthpiece for Green Party England and Wales, but I'm in the party I'm in for a reason, and they have the 5 tests that Green Party put together, and I'm happy to read those to you now. They're very much summarised for this purpose, and they were these 5 tests the Green Party are asking for was offsetting. Test number one, offsetting should be outlawed as part of the measurement of net zero reporting from governments and industries, meaning it shouldn't be possible to offload heavy lifting onto other countries or to gain carbon credit via initiatives like tree planting as an alternative to real cuts in emissions. So, of course, that means things like flying. That's just one example. There isn't actually enough land mass to plant all the trees that the airlines, etc., would have you believe is possible. So, you know, the truth is we just need to do less of these things that we know are damaging. And preferably stop it altogether at some point soon. And so test number 2, loss and damage. Loss and damage must be front and centre of any agreement with increases in aid to countries on the front line of climate crisis impacts. So loss and damage, cash transfers in the form of grants, crucially, rather than loans. For countries that are already overburdened with debt. I mean, you'll know this, Joe, from what's happened, that they've been granting loans, not grants, which is appalling. It's appalling. Considering we were one of the first countries to industrialise, and so we have that debt, karmic and otherwise, don't we? So test 3 of 5, phase out fossil fuels. It's a no-brainer, isn't it, as they say?
You'd think, wouldn't you?
Well, you would think, fossil fuels must remain in the agreement, and the language around this must be clear and unambiguous. So phase out of all fossil fuels. Vague text around abatement and efficiency must be replaced with clear commitments to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels. And my own personal hope on this and ours as a committee, it should be absolutely left in the ground, the oil and coal, and absolutely no longer in any use anywhere by 2030. So test 4 of 5, carbon pricing. Each country should commit to a system of carbon pricing to ensure the most polluting industries not only pay for the impact of their emissions, but are also incentivized to find efficient means of reducing them. Test 5, national targets. We must intensify future progress, checking on nationally determined contributions. Countries should check in yearly on nationally determined contributions to show domestic progress towards global goals. So there you go.
No, interesting. They're very interesting. I think, for example, I mean, for me, offset, I could totally agree with all that on offsetting. I think it's become such a cop-out in terms of we can do these bad things, but it's okay, we're going to plant a few trees. And like you're saying about flying in particular, for me as someone running a business, it happens with freight. There's so many businesses I know that tell me they're carbon neutral, but when you start digging down, they're offsetting the freight costs, you know, which is most of the carbon for many production companies. Climate justice, I think this is an interesting one because for me, as someone who was glued to watching the speeches and things that were going on during COP26, it was wonderful to see the people there from these communities, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, and we had people from the
I'm so glad you mentioned her.
Yeah, she was
Her
amazing.
speech
inspiring.
was just staggering, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and so exactly what needed to be said. And there were nodding heads around, you know, the ones that were awake anyway. And there was, you know, it was an amazing speech, and there were lots of amazing speeches from these people, also from young people, but there just wasn't enough of it. Do you know what I mean? There was still that element of, I'm not sure that people really understand the impacts on these countries, that they're immediate, that the things are happening now. You know, this is not like 2030, this is right now, and we need to be pointing this out even more. But yes, she was someone, I'm going to keep sharing her speech so people can keep listening to it and hearing what she had to say, because she was basically saying, look into your heart, think about all these people around the world, think about these impacts, let's deal with this as human beings for each other. So I found that very moving.
It was.
Yeah, so I think climate justice is something, as you say, it can't be loans, it has to be grants. And I think the other thing that upset me was the fact that there was a target set, I think in was it in Paris, I'm not sure, but 2 or 3 years ago at a COP, saying they had to do 100 billion. They haven't done it. So even
absolutely. Paris 2015, which was that groundbreaking, supposedly groundbreaking COP, that was agreed that we would reparations, isn't it, for the damage that our industrialized nations have caused to these countries. They haven't seen the money yet. I mean, how appalling is that? And the other thing I'm slightly embarrassed to admit to is that I didn't know until this year at this COP that in Paris 2015 they didn't agree to fossil fuel cuts. The fossil fuel term was barely there, barely referenced. They didn't commit to reducing. I mean, I find that appalling.
I don't think it was ever officially admitted that, firstly, that humanity was behind the climate emergency, and secondly, that fossil fuels had such a big part, until the IPCC report out in July this year. And if you think about it, even after this year's COP26, the number of countries who are still arguing about those two proven facts, it's caused the eventual agreement to be watered down to that we're not going to remove fossil fuels, we're going to, I can't remember the phrase, I can't
remember either,
some made up phrase, but which means we're not going to commit to stop using fossil fuels. So I think that's obviously a huge one. We both agree totally on fossil fuels. I don't think we need to cover that one too much. I think the carbon pricing stuff is really interesting, and for me, particularly with transparency and supply chains, it's looking at that whole supply chain, that absolutely everything that happens in life, in production, in everything, and seeing the carbon impacts of all of it, and not just taking the last little bit. I mean, for example, one example I'm always saying is when you make a t-shirt and you're using cotton from the other side of the world, and then you're typing made in England on the label, a lot of people think that's great because there's hardly any carbon there because this thing was made in England. And then you have to say, well, that cotton was actually grown in India, and then it was processed there, and then it maybe traveled to China to have something done, and then it came to England. And I don't think people understand that, and it's not talked about, you know, in terms of labor or carbon or anything like that. So yeah, that needs to be dealt with. And then yeah, talking about the national targets. I mean, one thing that worries me, I'm not a great, I should probably say this, I'm not a great nationalist in any way. I mean, I think I'm a citizen of the world, you know. I come from a mixed heritage and I feel a citizen of the world. And yes, I accept that, yeah. I accept
something we do in XR, sorry. Old habits die hard.
What does that mean?
We agree with something.
I quite like that. I'm going to be doing that from now.
Rather than butt in, which I'm just doing, sorry.
No, I'm a great butter winner. But yeah, no, I like that. That's good. I just nod a lot. Yeah. But yeah, so I think yes, there has to be, I suppose, smaller targets. I mean, we remember from our BT days having to have smaller teams to agree big goals. But if the smaller goals don't actually add up to meeting the big goal, then something's wrong, isn't it? So that's really important that all those goals link together. So I'm right behind all those, what you've talked about, and I think that they're fascinating. And I would urge anybody listening to go and find out more about them. And if you think they make sense to you, then you know, obviously find out more about the Green Party and how you can get involved in what's going on. And if they don't make sense to you, maybe talk to someone about it and they can explain some of the thinking behind it a bit more. I'm sure Rachel would, and I'm sure lots of other people from the Green Party would as well. And I even will if I can. So I think it's very interesting. So anyway, back to COP26. What do you think went well, and what do you think didn't go well? You've already alluded to the fact that it hasn't met your or hopes. What would you say did it achieve, and what do we have to work on now?
Okay, I mean, there's no two ways about it. Okay, it has failed. I don't want to greenwash that. Certainly don't want to whitewash it. We have to be clear and honest about that, and greater thinkers and much better known people like me, such as George Monbiot, Rupert Reed, amongst others, have said it's failed categorically, you know, and it has. So the good thing you can, okay, from a personal perspective, as I've already alluded to, it was useful for me, and therefore must have been for others too, although, as I say, I haven't had a chance to catch up with those others that I met yet, because of the connection. Yeah, Ian Forster's famous quote, "Only connect," and those connections that we all made with people from the global south, with Scotland, those are never wasted. And there was such solidarity for those of us on the outside of the blue zone. That's really important, because this is quite a lonely business. You know, I do a lot of my work from my kitchen, and I live alone. And it's so important, therefore, to get that feeling of strength in numbers, which these things give you. From an international perspective, going forward, we now know, because it's so spectacularly failed, and it has, with the gloves are off, there's a sort of a freedom in, we now know no one's coming to rescue us. We now know we can't rely on our leaders, and that's quite scary and sobering, but also we can start to assimilate, right, what do we do now? You know, it's hard. I'm sorry, I'm aware I'm not articulating this very well, but and it's still early days, because we're all still flapping about thinking, oh God, now what, you know, to an extent. but we now know we have to go all guns blazing. You know, we the royal. I mean, from my personal perspective, I now know I have to up the ante on protest, right? I now know I have to up the ante of the Green Party. And that probably means dedicating what's left of my life to doing so, to be honest, because things are so urgent, and we've got such poor leadership, you know, not just obviously in this country. Yeah, we can't wait. And we urgently need other people to fast track, if you like, their own journey with this thing. You know, I mean, I've been doing this for, not this exactly, but as I've alluded to earlier, from what I told you about my background, I've been in one form or another on this journey for about 20-25 years, and I appreciate most other people haven't, so they're not in the same place that I am with it. But it is possible to go from 0 to 60, you know, in a faster time than might be previously the case. I mean, you know, and people really need to. That's my plea. Is please, you know, get on board with this. You know, and you know, wherever you see yourself slotting in, yeah, whether it's sort of more conventional way of doing things, such as joining a political party like ours, and campaigning actively. That doesn't just mean, you know, we always have a lot of people that join that don't actually ever do anything. And while we absolutely welcome the joining fee and the support that brings, we absolutely urgently need more people to step up and do stuff. Yeah, we all know, you know, people have lives, families, jobs, blah blah, everyone has stuff, but you know, I would just ask people to kind of try and find a small window in your life and do something, you know. And if you are able to, then join us on the streets. It doesn't really matter what the label is, it doesn't really matter if it's XR or IB or whatever it is. Please just do it. You don't have to get arrested. It's helpful if you're willing to get arrested, because it stuffs up the system, and we need to stuff up the system in order for the system to start creaking and change. It's not something, I mean, I got arrested for the first time in August, and it wasn't something I ever thought I would do, and I didn't do it lightly. I thought it through, and I did it for an action I thought it was worth being arrested for. You don't have to, as I say, at all. And I think that the thing is, if you've never, some people are frightened of Extinction Rebellion, and certainly in Great Britain, and I get why, I do get it. But if you've never actually met the people involved in those movements, you're missing out on some of the most loveliest, warmest, beautiful, which sounds a bit hippie, but people that you will ever meet. You know, and we're all in this, constantly amazed at, you know, everywhere we go, the Hare Krishnas turn up, like with some hot food and some fruit and a vegan cupcake on a good day, you know. Somebody's always got a piece of foam you can sit on. There's always somebody with blankets, and there's Marcus turns up with his ukulele and his gorgeous wife Holly, and they've always got lots of wonderful, simple, funny little tunes we can all sing along to. And there's legal observers, there's arrestee support people, there's welfare people, there's police liaison people. You know, it's an extraordinary movement. It's not an organization, but if you want to call it that. I mean, I can't, you know, I don't dash, but if you've never ever met any of well, I'm one of them, but you know, it's hard to convey, but those who have done it know that in numbers you stop feeling scared. You genuinely do. And the police, they vary, they're people, and they're under pressure from their people in their earpieces, you know, to follow their orders. But they've got kids too. A lot of them are worried too. Some are more sympathetic to us than others, but they are there to serve us. They are there to do a job. It's not, generally, it's really not this awful scary terrorist thing. I'm afraid the right-wing press are making it out to be. It's really not.
No,
and I'm afraid it's necessary. I mean, if you know your history, okay, if you know about Gandhi, if you know about obviously the suffragettes, Martin Luther King,
Mandela, Nelson
Mandela to an extent, yeah, and actually more recently the farmers in India who campaigned in numbers on the street at in the markets, didn't they, for a year. They won. They won. So people who think this doesn't work are wrong.
Yeah.
This is probably the only thing that works. It's certainly the only thing that ever has worked. It's people have said, better people, more knowledgeable people than me who studied this stuff for like a PhD. This is 3.5% rule. What's 3.5% of our population in this country? It's about 2 million, isn't it? I'm no mathematician, but I think it's something around about that. It's not exact. It's not an exact science.
Yeah.
But that's, if we can get that many people mobilized, and I don't mean marching, we've tried marching. I don't know about if you were there for the Iraq demonstrations in 2003. There was over 1 million of us. It didn't work. Blair went ahead anyway.
Exactly.
So we know it doesn't work. Okay,
and
we're
Brexit.
not. And Brexit. We're not talking about marching for one day. They don't care about that because they know you're just going to march and then go home, right? You have to be willing to make yourself a bit uncomfortable, and you have to be willing to stay.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to stay sometimes for days. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you sleep out all night, but you have to find some way to be. Yeah, you have to be mobile. You have to be agile. And when I say agile, it's not an age thing, because like my friend Pam, she won't mind me saying, she got arrested on Saturday, and she's 80 something. I don't know, but I just know she's over 80.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, but there are no excuses. There was a lady with a tracheotomy who got arrested next to me, and I'm talking like there was earlier on, even some children came along with their parents. So at one point it was, fairly family friendly before it got a bit spicy later on. So you don't have to, you don't have to do, you want people going to need to ease into this, and they're going to need to get there, in their own time, and we know that. But that's what it's going to take, I'm afraid. And I'm at that point of realization, through learning from people who are more learned than me, who know more than I do and have studied stuff.
It's an interesting one, and like you say, there's a huge historical precedent for this. And just talking about hippies, by the way, you mentioned the word hippie. I obviously get called hippie quite a lot. I take that as a compliment. I think being a hippie for me, and maybe people are looking back to the 60s, 70s before we were around, but hippies was a drug smoking, whatever. I see hippie as a nature lover, a natural person, who's not afraid to be who they are. And you've also alluded to that, I like doing that, the community side of things. I mean, I've only done a small amount with XR, but the community side has been fantastic. We were screaming about fashion in Ipswich Town Centre just before the pandemic and things like that. I've tended to have been on the fashion side of things, but the community side is great. And finding people like yourself, I think, is also a nice, it's always that feeling of coming home, isn't it, when you meet people who are like yourself. And we all get one unfortunate part of our world at the moment is this thing of we all tend to be in bubbles, and our bubbles don't cross all that easily. And it's really challenging, I find, because you can be in a place where you think you feel everyone agrees with you, everyone feels the same as you, and that's a lovely, comfortable place to be. But actually, we have to cross into some of these other bubbles to say, like family, it's quite often family and friends, isn't it, and social occasions where they think, oh, here comes the widow hippie again, banging on about nature and stuff. But you really have to cross into those bubbles and find ways of communicating with people in ways that aren't going to frighten them to the point that they're going to be inactive, because I think there becomes a point when you frighten people too much that they are inactive or become really aggressive. But at the same time, I was at a family event a few weeks ago, and people were saying to me, oh, if I saw these Insulate Britons, I'd rev my car up and I'd go over there and I'd run them over, and all this nonsense. And people were saying to me, but they're losing popularity in the country. And firstly, no, they're not. But secondly, they're not out to make friends. We're not out to make friends. This is not this is not like a Facebook where we're trying to add to the number of friends we have. This is bringing people in to join in something where we all believe it's so important to do this. And in fact, talking of the wonderful George Monbiot, as we were, he wrote a wonderful article, I think at the weekend, about just needing 25% of the population to want to change the political leadership that we're in. And once you reach that 25% of people who kind of go, actually, look, this leadership isn't working for us or our world or our people or anything, that's not even the marching people, the people who are actually active. This is the people who are willing to speak out against it, write to their MPs, vote against it, whatever. Then we can have change. Because I don't know about you, but the way I feel it is we're almost like a two-state system at the moment. You know, I feel I have nothing in common with our leadership and so many people. I don't understand how people can do the things that they do and vote the way they do, and thinking about asylum seekers and all of these kind of things, some of the cruelty that happens. So it's not just the planet, it's a huge amount of things, and it feels like we're two different states, and the extreme end of one state is the people who are taking action, getting arrested, gluing themselves to things. And you have to have, and I don't mean extreme in a negative way, what I mean is they're really out there making changes, but you need that. And then you need the people who are gradually coming along the road in that direction and willing to vote against things and speak out and educate their friends and family. So you kind of need everybody. I mean, we talk about it in terms of a journey. Everyone's at a different place on the journey, and we talk about this a lot with ethical fashion and ethical consumerism, I guess, that you're starting to learn and you're starting to make more conscious choices as you go through life. And the far end of that, the real committed end of that, is the kind of thing that you're doing. And we need more people to be doing that to help move to this 25% when we can finally get rid of, you know, what we've got at the moment and have a system that works much better for the majority of people and for the planet. So you've got me ranting now. I must stop it.
No, you're not ranting at all. And we both know we're on the same page here, which is, you know, I spend a lot of my, well, not a lot, but a fair amount of my time not being on the same page as people. And that's really, as you say, it's crucial. There's no point in us staying in our echo chambers, is there? We absolutely have to be out there speaking to the people who are not on side. Of course, and we
bringing
do.
them along. But I mean, some of it, you won't persuade some people because they feel, well, unfortunately, as you said before, a lot of the media communication about, well, they avoid the planet stuff now because I think they know that a lot of people are afraid and knowledgeable, and they try, and the thing seems to be now you can carry on doing exactly what you're doing but do it in a more green way, which, you know, there's something in that a little bit, but not really. We really have to make massive changes to the way that we're living at the moment, but there's still there's that keeping people feeling comfortable, trying to get voted in for the next 4 years and all of that, you know. But we need to have bigger changes than that. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I do believe that there's going to be a lot more activism, a lot more people rebelling. I mean, I was talking to my parents about this, who are Green Party members too, and they're very much in there needs to be a revolution, you know. And that sounds really, like you say, really hippie, really out there. But actually, if the status quo doesn't get rocked, then this isn't going to get sorted out, is it? So
no, it's not, I'm afraid. And you know, as I say, you know, nobody I know, you know, wants to be sat on a cold road, possibly in the rain and the cold, being shouted at by motorists. You know, of course not. I mean, what kind of perverted people does the public think that the Insulate Britain and XR are, if that's what we enjoy? We're doing it because it's necessary, because it's visible, because it's out there, because it can't be swept under the carpet, because it can't be ignored any longer. You know, if we're all just on signing online petitions, writing to our MPs possibly, and chatting with each other on Facebook, I'm afraid nothing much is going to get done. Nothing much is going to change. And that's just the reality. Unfortunately, it's come to this. It shouldn't have come to this, but it has come to this. And that's what's now necessary, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think people don't actually understand the timescales involved here. No. That's part of the problem, because for a lot of people, COP26 is probably the first that they've really heard about the need, you know, the fact that leaders in the world are getting together, and the fact that it's in the UK, they've actually heard about the seriousness of the situation. So they're starting their journey there. They don't necessarily understand that urgency that we do understand.
Yeah. I know, and it's very hard. It's very scary for people when they realise just how bad things are now. You know, we're one of the most denuded countries in the world, and we've got, you know, the Prime Minister and others just spouting absolute rubbish and meaningless stuff about being green. And it's just rubbish. It's basically rubbish when you see what they've done in the Chilterns and in Warwickshire with the destruction of nature, which of course is so intricately linked to the climate crisis. Of course, they're totally synonymous, and that's something else people need to understand. You know, if we keep losing our nature, it's not just a nice to have for middle class people to go bird watching at the weekend. You know, it's essential. If we don't have wildlife in all its glory, whether it's a blade of grass or a bird or an insect or all of it, then the whole web of life collapses, including ours. And we are nature, and it's about time we got reacquainted with that that fact. And we are going to have to stop shopping. You know, that's like a national pastime now, and it's sad. And I think that, you know, I don't want to rant either, but there's such a spiritual poverty in this country since consumerism seemed to replace religion and football and other, not that that's been replaced, but you know what I mean, it's sort of the things that bound communities together and gave national identity and regional identities has been eroded to such a point that we're sort of left with this kind of horrible nihilistic hedonistic kind of society in a way. And I think that's a huge problem. We can't ignore the fact that there is this spiritual dearth, and that doesn't mean not being religious. It's not about religion. It's about proportion. It's about humanity. It's about proportionality. It's about our place as individuals and as communities, etc., within nature, within the world, within the planet, and how, you know, that lovely expression Ubuntu. I'm okay, you're okay. I am because you are. We would do really, really well as a society to adhere to that and remember that right now. And then I think we've got a really strong chance of moving forward together.
Yes, that's got to be not just local society, but also global society, and not just people, but also wildlife and other forms of nature and everything that we work on. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, actually, because obviously I do a lot of talks on consumerism, anti-consumerism and that kind of thing, but you're right, even the things like football, which were a local community thing, have become so commercial, haven't they? Everything is about the economic system that we work in, that it's just become pushed more and more and more. Even the pandemic became commercialized, and it's about growth all the time. We need to make this economic growth, we need to make money. Everything can be bought and sold. If it doesn't have a price tag on, it has no value, and that has been nature for a long time, so it's not valued. And as you say, people go out and they spend their money, and they believe that gives them rights. But what they're not understanding, because they've never been told, never been made to understand it, that there are much bigger impacts from what they're doing, from the choices that they're making, on a huge number of other people in the world, the wildlife, the planet, the nature, our own mental health, our own physical health, with the air that we breathe and the water systems and all of that. And all of that comes from the choices that we make when we spend our money, or don't, or choose not to spend our money.
Absolutely. And that's where you come in with the great work that you've done with Where Does It Come From? No, it's true. It should be credited as such. I'm just constantly, I'm kind of mystified, actually, by what it is that some/many people, and I can only really talk from perhaps the perspective of being in England and being British in my own country, as it were, what it is about our society that so many people seem to think is so wonderful that it should be held on to with all their might, no matter what. You know, what is it that they think they're so terrified of losing, that they think is so marvelous about the way we live? Because I think it's pretty hateful, and I have done for a long time. I felt alienated for a long, long, long time. Most of my adult life, I felt alienated, actually, by my own so-called society, which is become less and less cohesive, less and less caring, less and less community orientated, more I only care about myself and my immediate family and sod everyone else kind of. I'm exaggerating to make a point, Joe, but you know what I mean. And we've got not that much. We've got one of the highest suicide rates. Certainly it's the biggest killer of men, isn't it? Under 50, yeah. I think. And that's not just random. It's not just one of those things. It comes from a place of a loss of control. I'm not an expert, but that's as I understand it. And that loss of control, loss of genuine choice, and harks back to what I said before about our sort of increasingly hedonistic or nihilistic culture. That no wonder, the spiritual poverty thing again. No wonder, because people feel so like they don't have real, genuine choices, genuine control over much. And their entire survival is dependent on them being in hock to some employer or other.
Exactly. Well,
which may be gone tomorrow anyway. I mean, it's no way to live.
No,
Can we really not think of a better way to live than that?
And if you think about the young people, because one thing that I felt really passionately about with Glasgow was obviously I'm very, very young mentally, but not quite as young physically as I was. And I really felt for the young people. And there was some, of course, there were wonderful groups of youth outside, but there were some wonderful speakers. There was an Australian girl that I can't quite remember her name, but she was so articulate. And I really felt for her and everybody else who was talking about these things. And again, it's that split society, the way I see it. There's these amazingly aware young people, obviously Greta Thunberg and people like that, who are out speaking out there saying, we want this, we're angry, we need the world to change. On the other side, you've got large numbers of youths that are being fed the marketing messages and falling for it, and then going to choose to shop from, I'll do it, companies like Primark, like Shine, like ASOS, and those kind of companies, and just buying loads of old excrement and basically, that's better, and falling for that, putting value on what you're spending. Love Island is the example. I have never watched Love Island, but I've heard about it, and I've seen clips from it, and I feel sorry. I only feel pity for the people involved in that program, because they are being taught, they're this sort of epicenter of this is what's important. These items of clothing, these things that we have, there's no sense of knowledge or wisdom or experience or even, like you say, spirituality in any of that. So you've got two completely different bubbles of youth, and it's how do we help people to see what's important to them going forward and in the planet, Really...
Can I just follow on from that? Just quickly, you've inspired me to think, as a direct example of what you've just said. On Saturday, as in the day before yesterday, in Lambeth, sat down blocking a road. It was so interesting, the reaction. We got a few sort of mostly chaps rolling out of the local pub, pint in hand, who were having a go at some of us. And you cannot reason with a drunk person, as you know, you just cannot. And there was some who fell into that category, a clutch of young people who were sort of jeering and taking the mick, and weren't particularly even interested in our response, why we were there even. And then on the flip side, I noticed you had some other young people who just happened actually to be black in this particular case, who were really intrigued and seemed also to be really quite concerned watching, white people of all ages being dragged off the road and bundled into police vans. So you had, just to illustrate what you've just said, you had this absolute split down the middle juxtaposition of those wearing all the designer gear, half cut on a Saturday night, just sort of jeering and not getting it at all, vis-a-vis the more sober, perhaps in every sense, crowd, a lot of young people, who were bystanders as well, but it seemed to have a very different view of the proceedings.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how you reach them. I mean, I genuinely don't. It's got to be through role models, hasn't it? It has to be through watching it and experiencing it and being inspired by something. I mean, I don't pretend to even know what would inspire young people to change. It's got to be just learning.
Has to be education in the broadest sense, because when people say, oh, it's education, it always sounds a bit of a lazy sort of thing to say, doesn't it? And to most people, myself included, at one point, you know, education always meant the rigid confines of the school system, but it's not that kind of education that we're talking about at all.
No.
And of course, the most powerful thing would be one of their own peers, wouldn't it?
Exactly. That's what I was sort of coming to. There's some if anyone's out there listening, or anyone knows somebody, but I think it has to be inspiration, doesn't it? Always has to be. That's why I say we have to keep talking. We have to keep I say be the annoying person at the dinner, be the annoying person at the barbecue, whatever, who is putting your point, but don't, I always say, don't rant. I know I do it. I know I do. Can't help
we
it.
all do. We all do.
But try and bring them with you. Try and find a place of common ground. Do you love nature? Do you love going for walks? How would you feel if that wasn't there anymore? You know, how would you feel without? It's a really difficult one. I mean, it's with Extinction Rebellion, there's the 3 goals, isn't there, of what it's all trying to do. Can you outline what the 3 Extinction Rebellion goals are?
Well, tell the truth, number 1, which is still not happening. Certainly not from our media or the government, I'm afraid. 3 years on from the first rebellions, and that's still not happening. Citizens' assemblies. They have had a citizens' assembly at Westminster, but it because they're not legally binding, they can be ignored, and so far they have been ignored. I think. And I wonder how the people that took part in that are going to feel about that, you know, increasingly. Actually, as an aside, when I was walking to Glasgow from Carlisle, I had a really interesting chat with a chap who just sort of joined us. He had a day off from work and he just happened to be in the area on our way into Glasgow. And he was saying he'd just been on the Scottish sort of version of the Citizens' Assembly. And I said, oh, you know, I'd love to sort of interview you about that. But he said he wasn't really keen to discuss it. And I said, well, fair enough. He was okay to discuss it with me anecdotally there and then, but he just didn't want to have it in writing, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
But I said, you know, did you feel listened to? And did you feel that, you know, it was going to make a difference? And he said, yeah. He said he hoped, he said, that it would, and that it did. So yeah, it was really, really good to talk to him, actually. And he said it was quite interesting that people seem to be, you know, quite passionate about it, and mostly on side. And you know, as you've said yourself, I think people are really worried, and good, frankly, you know, good, because we should be. We have no idea how vulnerable we are.
No.
The world is not a big place, not really.
No, indeed. And however much you go and explore other planets, we're all stuck here at the moment.
Oh, don't get me started on
Elon
Musk
we won't
and
do
others.
That.
Don't get me started on space travel.
Or me. And what's the third one?
Sorry, the third one was act. Well, actually, sorry, I got it the right way around. The first one's tell the truth. The second one is act now.
Oh, right. Okay,
and the third one is go beyond politics, i.e. citizens' assemblies. Yeah. So the act now part is halting biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025, and we're already in 2021, so that's incredibly ambitious. The Green Party, ours is 2030. This government's is 2050, and that is far too late, way too late.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying this because I'm ex-Iron Green Party as well, but I actually do. I personally believe, as a councillor, I have actually, I can't remember, I think it was it March this year? I think it was. I put a motion to full council, the council I sit on, East Suffolk, as part of my political group, to try and get these, you know, the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, known as C Bill for short, CEE. And it's currently under the banner of 0 Hour, as the new name for that campaign. Okay. And I've tried to get our council to support that in March, and they didn't want to. And the thing that they hated the most, this is a Conservative-led administration, needless to say, the thing that they really can't stomach was the part of it about citizens' assemblies, because it would have meant having a citizens' assembly, and they feel that democracy is fine as it is. Thank you very much. And why is there any need? Yeah, exactly. Why would there be any need for one of those?
Well, if you I don't, I'm sure you've seen it, but for anybody listening, the People versus Climate Change programme that was made by the BBC, I think last year, wasn't it? Just before the beginning of the pandemic. They've just repeated
it, haven't they?
Yeah, I'm sure they have. I've watched it on.
It's on iPlayer.
Yeah, it's on iPlayer. Anyone should watch that, because I think that was a really wonderful way of showing how, with education, and as Rachel said, we're not talking school education, we're talking about getting experts in to talk to you and give you the facts and the actual proven scientific facts, not opinions about things. How a bunch of people that were very widely diverse in age, in education levels, in everything, came around to make lots of very well thought recommendations about changes that we should make in the UK to try and combat the climate emergency. And I think it's well worth watching, and it's also a really good lesson of how anyone can get involved in this, and it was something they all felt passionately about, even if it was just in their normal lives. I remember there was one lady who, she had a coal fire or something in her house, and her son had asthma, and the penny dropped, about all of this, and she was making changes in her own life. And there was another woman. I
saw that one.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
She was in Scarborough, wasn't she? Bless her. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And then lots of people then got involved in their local town councils and things like that after that, because they knew so much and were so fired up with it. So definitely everybody go and watch that one. So obviously we could talk for hours, but we better not, because people won't want to listen for hours, unfortunately. But maybe we can do this again in a few months when you know more about what the Green Party and XR is going to do going forward. So what, Rachel, this is an on the spot one, what would you advise and ask anyone listening to do to help the situation, to move things forward? What can they be reading? What can they be joining? What should they do now?
Okay. I just would make a plea to people, anybody's watching this, please don't assume that there's lots of people like me and you, Joe, out there doing this for you. We can't, because the task is too huge, because even with my background, I don't know enough. Even now, I'm still on my journey with this, but I know almost, I some days feel I know too much, if you know what I mean. But it's like people keep going on about Caroline Lucas, isn't she wonderful? Yes, she's absolutely wonderful, but she's just one Green MP. She's one person, and no matter how brilliant she is, and she is just one person, and she is nearly 60, and I am nearly 50, and we cannot go on forever doing it for everyone else's benefit. It's just not, I'm not comparing myself to her, of course I'm not, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point. Please do not think that, oh, it's fine, the government, because it's being talked about constantly now on the telly and in the media, it's fine, it's being taken care of. No, it isn't. It really, that's the hardest thing to get your head around. It absolutely is not being dealt with. We now know from COP, our leaders are not leading. They are being weak, they lack courage, they lack vision, they are being press ganged by lobbies, and especially the fossil fuel lobby. They are not going to do it without bottom-up pressure, and that means pressure from our population and populations around the world, and that means including you. So find your level. I wouldn't even, to be honest, Joe, say sit around reading stuff. I would say get out there. If you're an introvert, get over it. Come along anyway. You don't have to look very. All you've got to do, right, is Google Extinction Rebellion, or even if you're feeling up to it, Google Insulate Britain. At least find out, at least educate yourself what we are saying. Obviously, check in with the Green Party, join the Green Party. It's money is no barrier, right? It's £10 a year if you're unwaged. Everyone can afford that. Everyone can afford that. And that's why we do it the way we do it. We stagger it. Do that, but don't just do that and think, oh, brilliant, right, fantastic, back to whatever, back to Love Island or whatever. Please, we always desperately need, we don't just win elections by magic. We have to fight really hard to win them, and we've done really well, but there's so much more to do. We have to get more Green MPs. We've got an awful, terrible voting system in this country that makes it very, very difficult for us to win seats. We got 1.1 million votes in 2015, and we still only got one Green MP. If we had some form of proportional representation, we should have had 15 to 20 Green MPs by now. So that is what we are up against. But it can be done, and it must be done. And I don't want to give you an election party broadcast, but please, 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 if you could see your way, we're the only post-growth party, all right? The others will say things, of course they will, but we are the only party that has a post-growth agenda, because we recognise we cannot go on as we have been. It's not working. Our political system is not working, and our function within things is not working. So we have amazing, we're not just about the environment, we're about people, social justice, because we know it's so completely integral to climate justice. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there. But please don't sit on your backside and think, oh, somebody else will do the leafleting, somebody else will do the door knocking, somebody else will go to that meeting, somebody else will do that action. No, really, really not. We've just got on Wednesday, as you know, Joe, probably, yeah, nine peaceful, and I mean peaceful, protesters have been jailed for 3 to 6 months. One of them is currently on hunger strike. And that's hugely worrying, because she's an amazing person. She's an ecologist by background. She used to work for Wildlife Fund, and she got sacked from her job for whistleblowing in the Middle East because she was trying to defend nature and from a big building, a big hotel building complex. And she objected, and they sacked her, which is appalling. I'll spare you the rest of the details of her path, her life. But you know, this is how bad things are. We are teetering on the edge of fascism, Joe, in this country. And I don't say that lightly. I really, honestly, it breaks my heart to have to admit to that. But we are. Priti Patel, Home Secretary, she's currently, the police and crimes bill is currently going through the House of Lords. It is a hideous piece of legislation. We have a proud tradition in this country of peaceful protest, right? If this goes through, and it probably will, because the House of Lords can only make suggested amendments to it, it's going to ban all protests. Yeah. And there will be automatic stop and search without suspicions. There will be automatic arrests and jail terms. It's actually unthinkable. Well, that's why we're doing what we can now before it. But we can't be cowed. We can't be bullied by this government into stopping protesting. It's a basic human right to be able to peacefully protest.
It sounds like something you'd read about from another country, doesn't it? It sounds like something you'd read about from Belarus or, you know, Myanmar or somewhere.
Yeah. That's where we're now headed, and we have done what we have done in XR and elsewhere because we've had the democratic right and the freedom to peacefully but directly disrupt and protest. And we've done that all along, knowing that so many countries that some of which you've mentioned, don't have that freedom and that luxury without being tortured or possibly shot, or, you know, however, you know, things are not good in this country right now, but at least that doesn't happen, you know, touch wood. But if this bill goes through, I'm not joking, we are really on the edge of a fascist government here.
Well, I think was it Ken Clark said over the weekend that we are now in the situation where we have an elected dictator. So the government is elected by our faulty system, so they're now in a position where they can push through pretty much anything they want, and the whipping system of the MPs means even that Conservative MPs who do not agree with it have to vote for it or get kicked out of the party. So what kind of, we vote for our elected representative, but they're not allowed to represent us or represent our views in Parliament. So it's wrong. Well, that's an understatement of the century. And just to something that really spoke to me over the weekend as well was, or maybe at the end of last week, the current green activity being done by our government is to do a review of how we produce single-use plastics like plastic knives and forks, plastic plates, things like that for picnics and for events and things like that. And maybe we should have a look at that and see if that's the best use of what we're doing, you know. And I'm thinking, how far is that from where we need to be? How can it even be under discussion that those kind of things may or may not be useful or needed or any of those things? I mean, how big a change is it to say to people, bring your own knives and forks, or have knives and forks there that get washed? I mean, I just want to say to people, for heaven's sake, look at this, think about this, and whether that makes sense or not, because it's completely insane, isn't it? It's completely insane that we're still discussing whether or not we should get rid of plastic plates and plastic knives and forks, given the situation that we're in. And that is the level that the government are on. They're not saying that's the right thing, let's ban it. They're saying, let's run a consultation to look at whether or not we should ban them. And there was an announcement by a minister, I can't remember her name, that basically said, we need to look at whether we can use other materials for these disposable items, you know. No, we don't need to have disposable items.
Just don't have them.
Unnecessary.
Just don't have them.
Yeah, and that's how I feel about all sorts of different things. We're trying to replace things that we have in our lives to be comfortable with other things. Was really we have to change. You know, having electric cars is great for when you need to have electric cars, but really we need to be looking at, do we need to have so many cars? Do we need to be driving? I've got me ranting again now. Do we need to be living and traveling and working in the ways that we are now? And for most of us, of course we don't. Of course we don't. We can actually eliminate all of that carbon just by minimizing it, you know. So,
and actually, even if you have an electric car, okay, and that's not, you're absolutely dead right, that's not the panacea that it's being made out to be, because the electricity has to come from somewhere, yeah. And I'm fighting amongst many other good people, Sizewell C nuclear power station. We haven't got time to get into that and the whys and wherefores, but we have to use less. We're still not having a national conversation around, guess what, guys, we've just got to use less energy. And so
that's everything.
In the making of everything and in the use of everything. And so, you know, the power has to come from somewhere for electric vehicles. So that's something you have to think about. The rare earth minerals that go into the batteries, including lithium, are finite, because we still live on that finite planet. And there's issues around slave labor mining for those minerals for the batteries. There just aren't enough minerals for enough batteries for everyone to have an electric car. There just aren't. Plus, most people, including me, could not afford one now in our wildest dreams. And even if we could, as I say, for those previous reasons, it's not feasible. There's never going to be enough charging points. And we're still going to have congestion. We're still going to have umpteen deaths, roadkill of wildlife and roadkill of people. That those issues are still going to be there. And I believe, Joe, something I've been talking to somebody about this week, actually, part of the reason, one of the reasons amongst a few that I think that we are so divided as a society, obviously it's financial. We've got record levels of poverty along with record levels of decadence and affluence. We're so divided, it's horrendous. But we've got terrible divisions, as we've mentioned and alluded to, around people in their social media and other silos, and misunderstandings arising from that, because we're not having enough social contact. And of course, COVID hasn't helped with that. And COVID, of course, is related to the climate and ecological crisis. It's not just one of those things. It's completely directly related to where we are with ecological and climate breakdown, I'm afraid. But so all those things, and everyone traveling around in their own personal vehicles, how is that helping with social cohesion? Like, we need buses on the scale that they have in London, but obviously just on a smaller scale, depending on whether you live in a big town or a small town or whatever, wherever you live. We need that kind of frequency of public transport that's affordable. You know, like, it's brilliant in London. You pay £1 and off you go, wherever you're going. It's just so easy and it's so brilliant, and everyone can afford that. That's what we need, and we need it for the climate, for the emissions. But we also need it for social cohesion, because I know I've had some of the best conversations of my life sometimes with strangers on buses and on trains.
And safety. I think it's
safety. Oh God, do you know, I actually don't own a car anymore. I'm not trying to be whiter than white. I understand some people still need their cars, but actually you probably need one less, and certainly you don't need to make as many journeys as you think you perhaps do. You know, I have a bike. Okay, I 7 minutes walk from the station, but I take my train on the bike with me, but I no longer need a car.
Take your train on the bike with you?
No. Yes.
I know what you meant. I know what you meant.
Other way around.
Yeah. Now, funny enough, I was talking to my,
you know, if we think outside the box.
Yeah, exactly. Changing. Yeah, I was talking to my parents about this actually. You know, my mum's over 80 now, and she was basically saying, oh, she'll hate me for saying that, sorry, but she was talking about how when she was first came to the UK, you could get on a bus anywhere. You never had to worry about whether there was going to be a bus along, because there would always be a bus along. You know, you didn't have to worry about how you paid, because it was all very straight. In fact, there was conductors. She was talking about there was conductors in those days, which we probably would never go back to. But the idea was anybody without any knowledge whatsoever could get on a bus really easily and go where they wanted to go, you know, whereas now it's much more complicated, and they probably moved over to cards now everywhere, I should think. But at one point when my kids were young, you always had to have the right money. You didn't know where you were supposed to be going. It was really complicated, you know, to get on a bus. There was a whole learning curve thing about buses. So yeah, definitely we're going to have to change our behavior to become much more community oriented in that space. So yeah, I think that's so right. Getting out there, talking to people, and public transport is a great way of doing that. And I think we'll also have to look at things like leasing models, where if you really do need a car, maybe you can get that from a central pool, you know, of cars to go and do that. We don't all have to have several on our driveway just in case we need to have them. It's like everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's mad. Anyway, we've been going for more than an hour, so I think we probably ought to wrap it up there. Any links? I know that there's actually in Suffolk there's a XR meeting this week, isn't there? An online, is it Suffolk East? There's an online thing, so I'll put the link for that in the chat as well if anyone wants to join in. Hope I've got the date right, but I'll put it in there anyway, so people can listen in and see what's going on locally to them. The Green Party links I'll put in as well into the chat, and yeah, people can hopefully join you, me, us, and whatever our journeys are, and get involved in a lot of this.
Yeah, join us, and if you don't like us for some reason, or you don't see it doesn't fit you for whatever reason, you can always unjoin it.
Exactly.
You're not signing your life away.
Exactly, and it's not everybody's the same, and you're going to have to become the same as everyone else. You just be yourself and fit in where you fit in. I think that's the important thing.
Absolutely.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time. It's been really fascinating, and as you can tell from the length of our conversation, we could probably have done it for a really long time, but thank you so much. It is a huge subject, and I'll get you on again at some point, but thank you so much for spending the time with us on the Where Does It Come From podcast.
And thanks for inviting me.